We find ourselves in 16th century Seville, at the height of the Spanish Inquisition. Christ has returned to earth, performing quiet miracles among the people. Yet instead of celebration, his return ends in arrest. In the depths of a damp prison cell, the Grand Inquisitor, an aging cardinal, visits the silent prisoner to deliver a chilling accusation. He condemns Christ for giving humanity a gift it could never carry: freedom, a burden too heavy, too cruel, and ultimately destructive to those who received it. What follows is a fiery monologue, not against evil, but against the very foundation of free will. The Inquisitor claims that the Church, and by extension, any institution claiming to save mankind, had to correct Christ's mistake. Humanity, he argues, never wanted freedom. What they truly crave are miracle, mystery, and authority, the three pillars that soothe the anxious human heart. By giving people these, the Church has done what Christ would not, relieved them of the crushing weight of moral choice. And what is this terrible gift? It is the freedom to choose between good and evil, without miracles that compel belief, without authority to dictate conscience. According to the Inquisitor, Christ rejected the three temptations offered by Satan in the desert. He refused to turn stones into bread, refused to leap from the temple to dazzle the masses with a miracle, and refused to rule the kingdoms of the world. In doing so, he gave people the power to choose, and doomed them to suffer under the burden of that power. This haunting parable, known as the Grand Inquisitor from Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, stages a profound philosophical and psychological dilemma. What is worth more, freedom or happiness? And how far will human weakness go to avoid the weight of choice? Freedom versus happiness, the Inquisitor's dilemma. In Ivan Karamazov's conversation with his brother Alyosha, the narrative frame for the parable, the central question becomes clear. Freedom stands opposed to both happiness and power. The Grand Inquisitor sees humans not as noble beings, but as fearful, fragile creatures, unable to endure the responsibility that comes with true freedom. Nothing has ever been more unbearable for man and society than freedom, he declares. In his view, freedom brings only chaos, division, and suffering. Most people, he claims, would rather choose peace or even death over the despair of deciding between good and evil. Christ, in the eyes of his accuser, overestimated humanity. His message was for the strong, the rare few who could embrace freedom with sincerity and courage. But what of the millions of weak souls who experience freedom not as liberation, but as torment? The Inquisitor poses this question bitterly, mocking Christ's silent compassion. These people, he argues, yearn for someone to relieve them of the burden of decision, to tell them what to do, what to believe, and how to live. To them, Christ's gospel was aristocratic fantasy. It ignored the basic instincts and fears of ordinary people. They do not want freedom. They want bread and certainty. They long for someone to declare what is right and wrong, someone to feed them and guarantee their salvation without forcing them to wrestle with doubt or moral responsibility. And so, the Inquisitor confesses, not with shame, but with cynical pride, that the Church has done exactly what people secretly desire. It has taken away their freedom and given them happiness in return, or rather, the illusion of happiness. With us, he says, they will all be happy, and they will never rebel again. We will convince them that they are free only when they surrender their freedom to us. He offers humanity what it most desires: miracle, mystery, and authority. Miracle, the magical solution to suffering, the divine shortcut to comfort. Mystery, a narrative that explains all things, easing the fear of the unknown. Authority, a supreme figure or institution that dictates truth and removes the agony of choice. Under these three, people at last feel safe. They no longer fear what is right or wrong. The Church decides for them. They no longer wonder if they'll be fed. The Church provides, so long as they obey. They no longer struggle with existential uncertainty. The mystery of faith absorbs all their questions. Thus, the Grand Inquisitor claims to have rescued mankind from itself. not by elevating it, but by subduing it, not by freeing it, but by making it happy slaves. And in this dystopian vision, he imagines humanity kneeling before him and crying out, "Make us your slaves, but feed us." In other words, take our freedom. Just give us comfort and security. This chilling paradox, the willing exchange of liberty for bread and safety, lies at the dark heart of Dostoevsky's critique. The Grand Inquisitor is not merely a theological allegory, it is a psychological X-ray of our deepest fears. It asks, what do we fear more, being controlled or being truly responsible? The weight of freedom, the psychological dimension of the parable. The vision of the Grand Inquisitor is not merely a theological stance or a political ideology. It is, above all, a profound psychological revelation about the nature of the human soul. Through this character, Dostoevsky performs a kind of metaphysical X-ray. He exposes the inner fracture within us, a tension between two fundamental desires. On one side, the thirst for freedom and autonomy. On the other, the deep longing to be guided, to be spared the burden of choice. It is no accident that after Ivan finishes telling the parable, Alyosha doesn't argue. He simply responds with a kiss, just as Christ kisses the Inquisitor at the end. It is a moment of silent compassion, a gesture of tragic understanding. Even Dostoevsky himself refrains from taking sides. He doesn't clearly endorse either Christ or the Inquisitor. Instead, he presents the tragedy that man both wants to be free and fears the very thing he wants. In the early 20th century, Sigmund Freud would echo this duality, identifying the conflict at the heart of the psyche, a theme that Dostoevsky seemed to grasp intuitively. Later, social philosopher Erich Fromm would deepen this insight in his book Escape from Freedom. Fromm argued that freedom is not only a blessing, but a burden, one that many cannot endure. Though we fight for freedom historically, it often comes hand in hand with isolation, anxiety, and the crushing weight of personal responsibility. In traditional societies, people's roles were fixed. There were fewer choices and fewer existential anxieties. In contrast, modern life has granted us unprecedented liberty, but also unprecedented stress. As Fromm famously wrote, we are increasingly aware that freedom is not just a blessing, it is a burden. And when we can no longer bear it, we may seek to escape from it. Psychology today affirms this strange truth, that there is a twisted kind of comfort in not being free. When someone else, a parent, a teacher, a leader, or even a rigid law, decides for us, our anxiety lessens. Think of a small child. They make no decisions. They live under total protection and guidance, and in that, they are often carefree. Adults, however, must constantly choose. Every day is filled with decisions, each one a weight, and the more choices we have, the heavier that weight becomes. This is what Fromm calls the burden of freedom. When people can no longer bear this burden, Fromm suggests they tend to fall into one of three escape mechanisms. 1. Authoritarianism. Either by submitting to a higher power, becoming a child again under the rule of a leader, party, or church, or by becoming authoritarian themselves, controlling others to suppress their own inner chaos. In both cases, the individual avoids freedom by dissolving into a system of power. 2. Destructiveness. An unconscious fear response that leads individuals to destroy what threatens them, rather than confront it with freedom. This often takes the form of blind violence or hatred, a desperate attempt to eliminate uncertainty by annihilating it. Think of how some respond to anxiety or frustration with vandalism, cruelty, or rage. It's not strength, it's an escape. 3. Automaton conformity. Perhaps the most subtle and widespread, the individual gives up their uniqueness and self-direction, choosing instead to think, feel, and act exactly like those around them. They become like a machine, simply following the current of society. In doing so, they dissolve into the collective, and no longer have to face the anxiety of choosing differently. How many of us feel relief in just doing what everyone else does? And now, look at the Grand Inquisitor. He is the embodiment of all three. He demands blind submission to the Church, authoritarianism. He is prepared to burn Christ alive to preserve his sacred order, destructiveness. He fosters a mass conformity so complete that people rejoice in not having to think for themselves. He knows the truth of the human heart, that many would rather hand over their freedom than endure the torment of self-responsibility. As the text says, he knows the terrible truth about human nature. This, according to the Inquisitor, is the real human weakness, our inability to stand alone as truly free, autonomous beings. Humanity is weak, vulgar, and corrupt by nature, he says, condemned to never grasp anything greater than a piece of bread. It's a dark vision, a brutal cynicism. And yet, if we're honest, don't we see fragments of it in the world and within ourselves? The hunger for meaning and the collapse of modern sanity. In this parable, Dostoevsky also whispers a deeper, more existential question. If we strip away miracle and authority, what's left? The answer: the naked human soul facing the chaos of existence. And the Inquisitor believes humanity cannot bear that chaos. If old gods die, new ones will be invented. If miracles vanish, we'll build new ones. Not because we need truth, but because we cannot survive without meaning. Once man rejects miracles, the Inquisitor warns, he will reject God as well. And because he cannot live without miracles, he will invent new ones and bow down before false idols. That passage rings prophetic, because when people lose old certainties, religious, moral, cultural, they often turn to ideologies, charismatic leaders, material dreams, or New Age belief systems. The need remains the same: to make sense of a senseless world. The deeper issue here is meaning. Freedom without meaning becomes unbearable. The human soul cannot withstand a vacuum. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor and founder of logotherapy, argued that the will to meaning is the primary drive of human existence. When a person loses meaning, they begin to collapse psychologically. Modern psychology now confirms this. Many forms of depression, anxiety, and addiction are not just disorders, they are existential cries. They are the psyche mourning the loss of purpose. Frankl coined the term existential vacuum, a state of inner emptiness that leads to despair, apathy, alienation, and ultimately, illness. Today, we know that people with a strong sense of meaning are more resilient. They experience less anxiety, less depression, and greater psychological strength. Now think of the Grand Inquisitor again. His proposition is an exchange of meaning. Do you want to know why you live? What is good, what is evil, what your purpose is? Come to us. We will give you meaning and free you from responsibility. It's a seductive offer, and not just in religious contexts. In times of crisis or social upheaval, people often search desperately for certainty, for someone to tell them what to believe, what to do. That's why authoritarian ideologies flourish in moments of fear and confusion. People willingly trade their freedom for protection, simplicity, and order. Dostoevsky foresaw this. In fact, philosopher Nikolai Berdyaev once said that the Grand Inquisitor can be read as a prophecy of totalitarian socialism, but it applies just as much to the 20th century as it does to our own era. We see it today, in politics, in media, in the rise of extremism. We see people begging, not for truth, but for clarity, not for freedom, but for relief from uncertainty. And in that trembling need, the Grand Inquisitor still speaks. Modern reflections. The contemporary soul faces the same temptation. How then does the Grand Inquisitor speak to us today? It acts as a mirror, revealing not just a distant theological debate, but our own modern behaviors, fears, and collective desires. Dostoevsky offers a timeless symbol of our quiet surrender to human weakness, and that symbol feels more relevant now than ever. If Dostoevsky lived today, As one modern scholar observed, he would have no shortage of material for a new Grand Inquisitor. He might draw inspiration not from a medieval church but from consumerism, mass media, political spectacle, or the cult of science as religion. All of these serve, in their own way, as modern safety nets, substitutes for the miracle, mystery, and authority that once comforted humanity. Let's examine them. Consumerism. We live in an era where meaning is often replaced by acquisition. Advertising and mass culture don't just offer us products, they tell us what to desire. They whisper what happiness should look like. Consumerism delivers a hit of pleasure and a false sense of purpose. I buy, therefore I am. It becomes a new form of miracle and authority. If you obey the market's commandments, if you follow the trends, you will be fulfilled. We are so preoccupied by this artificial sense of purpose that we stop asking the deeper questions. Is it any surprise that many of us find comfort in shopping malls and screens and consumption, especially when we feel emotionally empty? Is this not just another escape from the weight of freedom, trading what we are for what we own? Mass democracy and political rhetoric. In theory, we live in free societies. In practice, the masses are often manipulated, not through violence, but through slogans, spectacle, and charismatic saviors. Demagoguery exploits the same human weakness the Grand Inquisitor describes: the desire for simple answers, the need for someone to blame, the longing for order at any cost. How many modern leaders have said, in essence, "Surrender some of your liberties, and I will give you safety, security, and prosperity"? And how often do we accept that offer, relieved to no longer think, to no longer choose? Every time we submit to such tempting promises, we relive the Inquisitor's dilemma. And history shows that people often prefer comforting lies over complex freedom, with tragic consequences. The religion of technoscience. Science is one of humanity's greatest achievements. But when elevated into dogma, when scientism replaces spirituality, it too becomes a new kind of faith. If we reduce the human to nothing but chemical reactions, genetic algorithms, and biological machines, we may free ourselves from the burden of moral responsibility. But we also strip ourselves of depth, of soul. Today, in an age of algorithms, data, and surveillance, many feel that they've surrendered their autonomy to invisible systems, machines that know better. What news we see, what paths we drive, what choices we make. It's a paradox. We've gained limitless options through technology, yet many feel more lost, more externally controlled than ever before. It's as if a new invisible authority has taken the place of the old one, just as powerful and even more seductive. Mental health and the collapse of meaning. We cannot ignore that modern humanity faces a global mental health crisis. Anxiety and depression have surged in recent decades. We shouldn't reduce these disorders to freedom anxiety alone, but many experts agree. Modern life, fragmented, overloaded with information, detached from tradition, has magnified our inner confusion. When everything is possible, but nothing is certain, the mind collapses under the infinite pressure of choice. Here, the Grand Inquisitor offers a psychological insight into modern suffering. Why does the modern youth freeze in front of limitless career options? Why does someone place all their hope in a strong political leader or cling to a toxic relationship? Because deep down, many of us are afraid of being truly alone and truly free. Conclusion. Embracing responsibility, searching for love. Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor doesn't offer us easy answers. It leaves us with a sacred ambiguity. Christ, at the end, says nothing. He responds not with logic, not with anger, but with a kiss, a gesture of silent love. That gesture has been interpreted many ways. Perhaps Dostoevsky is telling us, the truth of human existence cannot be forced through argument or power. It can only be lived through love and suffering and freedom. And that kiss leaves the Inquisitor speechless. Despite all his power and cunning, he lets Christ go free. For us, the modern reader, This parable is both a warning and a consolation. It warns us. Every time we hear that inner voice saying, "Let someone else decide for you. Obey, and you'll be safe." We must remember the hidden price of such surrender, the loss of our very selves. The miracles we're offered, the promises of easy happiness, are often idols, demanding our conscience in exchange. But this story also comforts us, because it sees our human weakness not with contempt but with compassion. We are not alone in our fear of freedom. This fear is universal and timeless. And if even Christ in Dostoevsky's myth chooses to answer cruelty with a kiss, perhaps we too can meet our frightened selves and each other with more tenderness. Ultimately, the Grand Inquisitor challenges us to embrace an existential truth, to be free and happy, not despite responsibility but because of it. To find meaning not in surrendering to some modern inquisitor, but in owning our freedom, no matter how heavy. As Viktor Frankl wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Perhaps this is where true joy begins, not in the bread handed to us by power, but in the quiet strength that grows when we bear the burden of freedom together. In a world where new inquisitors whisper from every screen, Dostoevsky's voice still echoes. Freedom is frightening, but it is also sacred, and our redemption may lie not in escaping it, but in choosing it again and again with courage and love.